Welcome back, I'm Jude, and today we're talking about how to stop anxiety and panic attacks using mindfulness skills. So first of all, what are panic attacks? I see them as runaway anxiety. Essentially, when the anxiety gets so bad that it's overwhelming and our body goes into a panic, it goes into a fight or flight. So first, what's anxiety? Anxiety is our body in fear. So it could be afraid of all sorts of things. It could be afraid of very tangible dangers in our environment, or it could be afraid of something from long ago that is no longer present, or what it often is afraid of feeling something, afraid of having a certain experience. Now, often the fear underneath anxiety is not conscious or not fully conscious. And so long as things are not conscious, we're not actually aware of what's really going on internally, they're going to have more power over us. So the first thing we want to do is examine what is the fear underneath anxiety. If we've had anxiety since we were young, then we have to look at our early life. What were the fears in our early life? Now, one thing that's quite common is essentially a fear of abandonment. And this is so incredibly common because as an infant, that is our biggest fear. We're biologically wired to feel safe when our mother is there caring for us and to kind of panic and cry when our mother or caregiver is not there to care for us. And this makes total sense because if you're a baby, you cannot survive on your own. If your mother abandons you and leaves you, you will die. You're completely helpless. So this ingrained biological fear, this fear of abandonment, that I'm going to be left alone, that I'm not going to be loved and supported and cared for in the world, and therefore will die, is a very real fear that can then go on to manifest in all other sorts of ways. It can come up in relationships, it can come up in friendships, it can come up just in a general sense of the world, of is the world here to care for me? Can I trust the world that my needs will be met? Or is the world a dark, scary place that is difficult to survive in? Now, at a certain age, we start engaging more with social groups, with friends, and developing meaningful relationships outside of our immediate family system. And this brings a whole other wave of fears about being liked and accepted, about finding people that you can trust and care for and be cared for. Now, for the vast majority of human history, we have been living in small tribes. And if you're living in a small tribe, being accepted by that tribe is a life or death thing again. Thousands of years ago, if you got kicked out of your tribe, it was very unlikely that you would survive alone in the wild. We needed each other to support each other, to care for each other, to feed each other, to protect each other. It was a really brutal world. And so this feeling of I need to fit in, I need to have a group of people that I can trust, that are there for me, that if things go badly, they will care for me. That is also deeply ingrained, deeply wired into our biology. And now it's much more rare that we have those feelings in our social circle. This feeling that if something bad happened, if I got sick or if I lost my job, that people would care for me, that I would be taken care of, not that I would be out there alone in the world and possibly not survive. So this need to have this social group that really accepts you, that you feel more or less unconditionally accepts you and will care for you in hard times, that is still wired in us. So this can also be a huge cause of anxiety for people, not having a social group that they feel they can really trust and lean on. And now there's other endless sources of anxiety. There's existential reasons, just feeling alone in the universe, the uncertainty of death, all of these types of things can also be a huge cause of anxiety for people. But I want to talk about one more big one, which is unprocessed trauma. So a lot of people had traumatic experiences when they were young, and they didn't feel safe enough and supported enough to really experience and process the emotions that arose as a result of that trauma. Often with trauma, especially with abuse, and especially unfortunately with sexual abuse, people feel a lot of shame around what happened. And that shame causes a contraction, and then you don't process all the other underlying feelings. So for people with a history of trauma, and there's all sorts of trauma, it's not always physical trauma. Often trauma is psychological abuse. Those who have suffered from all types of abuse often have a lot of unprocessed feelings that are really scary. And again, they may not even realize it. There may not be a conscious awareness that this is still living inside the body, that these feelings are still there, deeply repressed. And what can happen is that as people become more relaxed and more open, these deeper things emerge. And that can be really scary and cause a resistance, a clamping down, which just creates more conflict. So a feeling is trying to come up and release, and it's scary because you don't know what it is or where it's coming from. It feels overwhelming. It feels like it's too much. And so you instinctually, without thinking about it, resist the experience. That resistance causes this conflict. There's now this attempt to express something, for energy, for feelings to come out, and then there's this clamping down, and that causes this tension, and that can often turn into a panic attack. So I have a video on trauma I also have a video on equanimity, which is a huge piece on trauma. And these just go over in more depth some of the theory of trauma and healing. Now, in general, my approach with anyone who I work with is to first start to befriend our body. I often use this metaphor like a rescue dog, like a dog who has endured a lot of trauma. And you may meet a dog like this and you see it's very scared. And we intuitively know how to approach a dog like this. We don't yell at the dog, stop being scared. We know that's just going to activate its nervous system more. It's going to make it more nervous. We know that we have to come really gently, really softly, lower our voice, get down on its level, and not get too close, to really slowly show the dog that we are safe, that we are kind, that we are there for it, that it can trust us. And it's the same with our body. We have to show our body that we can be gentle with it, that we can be caring and compassionate with it, and that it can actually trust us. And what we're really doing here is befriending our nervous system. We're showing ourselves how to calm down, how to come to more of a sense of homeostasis or relaxed ease. So I have a lot of practices on my channel that are around this. There's one called Working with Distress. There's meditation for ADHD, which is exactly this. Even if you don't have ADHD, it can be very effective for anxiety or other sorts of nervous system activation and ability to relax. I have another practice called Working with Feelings. And then I also have a course, meditation for ADHD, which goes really deep into how we can befriend our nervous system, how we can be more kind and gentle with ourselves, how we can process and overcome the barriers to self-compassion and come to a more restful place in our body. So this is the beginning point, is to really start to befriend our body, to really start to understand and have more compassion for our body. We're slowly and gently building more of a sense of trust. And there's a lot of techniques around this, and the key is we want to go slow, we want to go into the discomfort, and if it gets too overwhelming, we come back and we find our ways to ground. This is called titration, where we go into the discomfort, we come back and ground, and that shows our body that we're able to go into the discomfort, we're able to come back and ground, and it builds that skill and that trust that we can be with discomfort because we know how to come back out of the discomfort. So what a lot of this is, it's becoming more and more okay with discomfort. So discomfort doesn't seem like a threat. And this is a big reason for panic attacks, is because these experiences that are happening internally feel like threats. They feel like an enemy, they feel like an attack, and that's why we go into fight or flight. So the key to avoiding or stopping panic attacks is actually to not fight against the experience. When we start feeling a panic attack coming on, we actually want to tell ourselves, want to reassure ourselves that we are going to be safe. First of all, panic attacks never really physically harm people. We want to know that, yes, it's scary, for sure it's scary, but it's okay, that we will survive it. And the more we can start to adopt this mindset and not be so afraid and actually welcome the panic attack, say, oh, if this is coming, that's okay. I can handle the anxiety. I can handle the discomfort. I will be okay. If we can have that trust, it will greatly subside the panic attacks. And so this isn't a thing that is going to happen the first time. Of course, it may. But what we're looking for is a longer term approach to really change our inner relationship with anxiety, with panic attacks, and that will cause them to subside. But it's always this up and down thing. You'll have progress at times, and then you'll be like, oh yes, panic attacks aren't a problem anymore. And then it will come on, and then it will freak you out because you thought you were over them. So it really does take practice. It really does take time. And I've worked with a lot of clients who get panic attacks, and pretty much all of them, it's a different reason, or at least there's something very unique about their experience. So what works for one person to help them feel more safe isn't necessarily the same thing that's going to work for another person. And this is where we look at another dimension, which is our thinking, our thoughts. So we talked about the body, what happens in the body with this runaway anxiety and this resistance to that, and how that causes this negative feedback loop that just causes the threat to feel more intense and causes us to go into fight flight. But the other factor is what's happening in our mind. What are we thinking about? What thoughts are impacting us? What are the fears in our mind? Because the fears in our mind may or may not be related to the fears in our body. Of course, there's going to be some relationship, but often there's kind of a unique thing, and sometimes might not fully be in alignment with each other. We want to look at what are the fearful thoughts, what are the things we're imagining, and again, we can welcome all of those thoughts. The thing is, when you start to observe your thoughts, you're no longer in the thoughts, and that takes a lot of the wind out of their sails. So the power of the thoughts, the power of believing the thoughts or believing these things are going to happen, that subsides. And we don't have to take them so seriously. We can realize these are just thoughts. Now, there's a lot of great ways to work through thoughts, but it's really unique to each person and what the thought constellations are, what the thought patterns are. But the first thing you want to look at is how true are these thoughts? Are these things really truly true? Is there maybe a bias here around your thoughts? And to really reflect on what the biases are, to reflect on how true these things are. There's a lot of great modalities, great ways to work with these things, but you really want to be tracking the thoughts and tracking the body. And this is why meditation practice is really great, because when you're having a panic attack, you're not going to be able to track all this stuff. But if you practice tracking these things when you're not having a panic attack, when you're relaxed, then when things start getting out of control, you will intuitively know that you can track the thinking and the feelings separately. And that's going to make the intensity of the experience subside a lot. And you're going to feel more in control. So the last thing I'm going to talk about here is the skill we practice in meditation called non-identification. This means that we are watching our experience and we know we are not our experience. So we are this observer, and we notice the observer is consistent. What's it like to see things, to experience things? That place of observership is always more or less observing. Now, what is being observed changes. But if we can come back to that realization that, hey, here's anxiety happening. That's not me. That's just an experience that's coming through my awareness. That can really help it subside. Now, again, this is something we have to practice for a while. It's not like you're going to hear this once and then while things are getting out of control, you're going to be able to do it. But the one key here is that some people do this practice, but they do it in a way that is suppressing or rejecting the experience. And that's not what we're doing. We're not trying to push the experience away or stop anything from happening. There's actually more intimacy with our experience. We're actually becoming closer to it, and we're actually trying to experience it more fully with more clarity, but knowing that we are not that, knowing we are the observer to the experience and not what is happening in the experience. This way we don't become dissociated, which is a risk when working with habitual discomfort in the body. Okay, that's it for today's video. Like, subscribe, do all the things, leave a comment. I really appreciate it. Let me know if you have more questions. Check out the resources. Thanks for tuning in.